In the darkness of the High Arctic winter, in 1954, a group of Inuit entertained the troops in a place called Resolute Bay. It's been more than a year since the Canadian government relocated them here from their home in Northern Quebec. It will be another 30 years before they see their home again.
My father used to say, "Why is it that we're here? Why did the government place us here? They didn't assist us in anything at all, and our lifestyle got worse here." He didn't have anyone to ask. He didn't have anyone to ask these questions, so he would ask these questions to himself, and he would say, "I wonder if the government placed us here to die."
In 1953, Louis Saint Laurent strolls into his second term as Prime Minister, the same year as the High Arctic relocation, and addresses the House of Commons on Arctic affairs. Canadian governments, he observes, have administered the North in an almost continuous state of absence of mind. Over the last century, the government has virtually ignored the North and left the administration of its 9,000 Inuit inhabitants to three groups: the Christian Church, the Hudson's Bay Company, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The one with the greatest influence on Inuit daily life is the Hudson's Bay Company. For decades, the Inuit have lined up at Hudson Bay trading stores to do business, and the company has made its fortune off the fur trade. For the company, fur trapping is the most important part of Inuit life. It measures the Inuits' ability to survive off the land by the number of pelts they bring in and the amount of credit they have to spend at company stores. But that's not the way the Inuit see it.
In those days, we did not depend entirely on the Hudson's Bay. We were living out of the land, much more than we were getting our supplies. We used to go to the Hudson's Bay store to get a flour, tea, those little things. But they were not our main food. We survived from the land. We've been surviving from the land for centuries. And at that time, in the 1950s, we were still nomadic people. This area has been home of our ancestors for centuries and centuries. So we knew the land. We knew what kind of animals it has. By hunting, we feed our people, our dogs, and that was our normal life.
The Hudson's Bay Company and the government are not as confident about the Inuits' ability to feed themselves. By the 1950s, many Inuit are running out of the credit they need to buy goods at company stores. The bottom has fallen out of the fox fur market, and prices have plummeted from $25 to $3.50 a pelt. For a while, the company extends credit, but it has no intention of supporting the Inuit through hard times. Under increasing pressure, the government pays relief, but it wants to find a less expensive solution to what it now calls the Eskimo problem. In 1952, the government holds a conference on Eskimo affairs. Discussion focuses on reducing relief payments by finding ways to keep the Inuit economically independent. Everything from reindeer herding to education makes the agenda. But the main debate centers on whether the Inuit should be assimilated into white society or encouraged to return to their traditional way of life. Everyone with an interest in the North is invited to voice an opinion. In fact, the only people not invited to the conference are the Inuit. When questioned about their exclusion, the government responds.
The only reason why Eskimos were not invited was, apart from the difficulties in transportation and language, that it was felt that few, if any of them, had yet reached the stage where they could take a responsible part in such discussions.
Even though the conference doesn't produce any policy, the government decides to act. Officials design a little experiment to get a few Inuit families off relief. They will simply relocate them to isolated areas of the Arctic, where they can return to what the government sees as their traditional way of life. It's areas like Port Harrison, Quebec, where the government is spending the most money. These are the people they target for relocation.
What I loved the most was the land. I loved to pick blueberries and cloudberries, and I also loved to collect minnows from the streams. This picture was taken when I was still living here and working for a white family. I used to work part-time for them, and I would go there whenever the woman had a lot of work to do. She would place the baby on my back and send me outside.
When I was at home, I used to help my mother doing women's work. There were 7 children in the family, and we were all girls. Since my father had no son, as soon as I got old enough, I used to help him hunt. By the time I was 17, hunting was my way of life. It was part of who I was as a person. In those days, we had nothing to worry about because we knew this land and the land was good to us. I did everything following the ways of my mother and father.
I was 22 years old when they relocated us. I remember that we were never hungry then. We were happy with our lives here, and I would like to tell you a story about what happened before the relocation. They told us that there will be an abundance of food in the new location and that we should try it out. They also said that we could return in about 2 years. At that time, I used to carve with my stepfather, Paddy. Carvings were very much in demand then. We practiced very hard and eventually earned more money. It helped us to be independent men. In the store, we could buy supplies that helped make our lives better.
The traditional way and the white way. By 1953, the Inuit at Port Harrison have already begun the process of blending 2 cultures. Many of their children are attending school. They have access to a church and a newly constructed nursing station. Some have taken up residence near the settlement. For those selected for relocation, all of this will be lost with the move. Local welfare teacher Marjorie Hines keeps a detailed account of Port Harrison life.
Eskimos from all camps on the mainland visited the settlement during the month. All native homes have been visited. The standard of neatness and cleanliness is on the whole good. very little sickness has been reported. Most families have fish nets set in the bay and fairly good catches have been made by all. Many people have caught young seals in their fish nets. There have been more seals in the bay near Port Harrison this year than at any time since I came here in January 1950. 9 picture shows have been held during the month. We had one get-together for Eskimos and any others who cared to come, a program of games and dancing, some activity for each age group, including the toddlers and the aged.
Thousands of miles away in Ottawa, bureaucrats are firming up plans for the move. 3 sites are selected for the relocation. Resolute Bay on Cornwallis Island, site of a supply base run by the Canadian and American military, and Craig Harbour and Alexandra Fjord on Ellesmere Island. All of them are in the High Arctic, over 1,400 miles from the Inuits' Port Harrison home. It seems a long way to go, just to get 7 Inuit families off relief. But the government is looking at a much broader picture. Since World War II, American forces have been stationed in the Canadian North. With the escalation of the Cold War and the threat of Soviet missiles aimed over the polar cap, their numbers increase. By 1953, rumor has it that the American contingent in the High Arctic Islands will dramatically expand.
May 8, 1953. The Arctic archipelago is the most sensitive as far as sovereignty is concerned. If all the projected U.S. developments in this area are carried through, there would be about 1,200 U.S. personnel in this part of Canada.
As Secretary of State for External Affairs, Lester Pearson observes, a further increase would present risks of infringements on the exercise of Canadian sovereignty. Seven Inuit families with permanent homes in the High Arctic would strengthen Canada's hold on the region. Among those selected are an 80-year-old grandmother, a young woman pregnant with her first child, and a 24-year-old woman disabled by polio named Nutaaq.
When my mother's new husband, Batty, our new stepfather, learned that we would be relocating, he came to fetch me as they did not want to leave me behind. Back then, the white people, were feared, and we treated them as people who are strict and must be obeyed. We would never answer back. At that time, we were obedient like small children.
I first heard about the relocation when the police came by dog team with an interpreter and told us we were leaving. He told my older brother and his wife's family, "There are many animals at the new location and that is why you are leaving." I will never forget his words. He said that whenever we felt like returning home, we could, and he made it sound very attractive. Before we left, we didn't live in this exact spot. We lived down there, right behind. My brother Simeone and I left everyone we knew because we had been chosen to leave.
I was 12 years old when we went up to the High Arctic. When the RCMP came to our camp here, he told us that my grandmother was one of those people who were chosen by the government. So my father really had no choice but to go with them up to the High Arctic. When the RCMP boat picked us up, and a lot of our families were scattered all over the land here, and we never had a chance to see most of our families. On leaving this camp, I said to myself, oh well, I'll be back here in a couple of years, so I'm not going to miss it that much.
A telegram from the RCMP superintendent in charge of the Arctic outlines the promise made to the Inuit.
Stop. Families will be brought back home at end of year if they do desire. Stop.
Moving day is set for July 25th, 1953.
I was 17 when we left. This is the area where we set up the tents while we were waiting to be shipped out. These stones are the original foundations of the tents. They put us into a big square box and lifted us up. The people from Nutaaq, Sam Willie, Johnny, Nutaaq, a lot of Peterhead boats and other small boats. They were watching. I can still see the boats now. When the CD Howe set sail, our relatives in the small boats were calling out to us. I was yelling back, "It's only going to be 2 small years. We'll be back before you know it." The tears were running down their faces, crying. Everyone was crying.
We were not used to maps then, and we didn't know it was as far as it was. No wonder. We didn't know how to read maps. On the ship, they used to say, "It is very far." We knew then that it was going to be very difficult to go back.
We didn't have our traditional parkas. Before leaving, they gave us a thin shell with a pointy hood that had no lining. And they gave us socks. That's all they gave us. I remember this. The socks would usually go up to here, but my sister Anna added more material to make them warmer. When the representatives from the government saw me with my socks on the boat, they asked me why my sister had added some material. They told me that we had wasted money by lengthening the socks when it was not necessary. My socks were too high. They exceeded regulatory length.
As we were nearing our destination, I began seeing great rivers, or so I thought, but these were great rivers of ice, unmelting ice. It was a land of unmelting water. We haven't been told that where we were going would be a land of ice.
17 days after the Inuit set sail, bureaucrats call an emergency meeting. The Air Force at Resolute Bay has serious concerns about its future Inuit neighbors. At a damage control meeting, the Department of Resources and Development tries to ease their worries.
Lieutenant O'Neill stated that he was afraid there was not sufficient wildlife in the Resolute area to provide for the proposed Eskimo population. Mr. Cantley replied that he had reason to believe there was sufficient marine life. No one could say for sure if this was the case, and so consequently, the experiment was being staged. Mr. Sieverts pointed out that the Canadian government is anxious to have Canadians occupying as much of the north as possible. And it appeared in many cases the Eskimos were the only people capable of doing this. Lieutenant O'Neill asked how many families would be going to each of the 3 settlement areas. Mr. Cantley stated that this would be decided on the boat, taking the Eskimos to their destination.
They divided the families. They divided us like dogs. The women were openly crying as we were being divided up to go to 3 different places.
Once divided, each group is joined by a family from Pond Inlet, who will act as teachers and guides. A total of 4 families are dropped off at the Craig Harbour RCMP post, and the rest head north to Alexandra Fjord. Ice conditions force them to turn back, and so 2 more families are dropped off at Craig Harbour. The rest remain on board with an RCMP officer for the 250-mile journey to Resolute Bay.
We got into Resolute early one morning, and by afternoon it was blowing snow, and it was empty. When we got up to the High Artic, I was expecting to see the trading post, the RCMP, the nursing station, the Anglican church, because our life was supposed to improve. When we got up there, I was shocked. It was empty and cold.
When I have to speak about my father, I'm sorry, I can't help but cry. No wonder I worked with him all the time. Moving from Port Harrison, Nutaaq was hard for him, but believing that he was going to a better place reassured him. When he first set foot on that land, it was apparent by his body language that he was shocked. He didn't know how we were going to live in such a place. There were so many of us in the family to feed, and since he was the main provider, he got totally lost as to where he was going to find food.
On October 14th, the RC constable at Resolute files his first report.
Tents are still being occupied by the natives. With blowing snow and low temperatures, heat for the tents consists of discarded packing crates burnt in small handmade stoves and seal oil burned in the native stone lamps.
The Inuit dropped off at Craig Harbour face yet another move, this time to a location 60 miles down the coast near Grise Fjord. The RCMP officer explains the reason for the move.
The above-named camping spot was picked for several reasons. It was thought best to have the natives away from Craig Harbour by at least 2 days sled travel. Being encamped at Craig Harbour might have given these natives the tendency to look for handouts when not absolutely necessary.
They dumped us like dogs. There was little light and the weather was already cold. They moved us to a barren land in front of a big mountain. We didn't have any supplies. We had nothing but tents. They did give us buffalo hides, which we used to insulate our tents, but they made our tents dark.
Winter brings the disappearance of the sun and 3 months of darkness, something the Quebec Inuit have never experienced.
When the season of darkness arrived, we had to stoop to see what we were sowing. I missed the daylight and I thought that it would never get light again, and I was scared.
Camped on the shoreline, the Inuit wait for snow conditions to improve so they can build their igloos. But the right conditions never come, and so they spend their first winter in canvas tents. There are 6 people living in Anna Nungaak's tent, including her mother, her stepfather Paddy, and their 3-year-old son, Larry Odeluk.
I remember the cold mornings when we were living in a tent the first year or 2. It was. I remember the mornings being very cold. and the walls have been very dark. And years later, I found out those were old buffalo hides, which were used for insulation in our tent.
The dream of a better life quickly fades. The caribou and muskox herds near Grise Fjord are severely depleted. The RCMP tell the Inuit they can shoot only one caribou per family per season. If they shoot a muskox, they face a $500 fine or jail. But the difference in food creates the greatest hardship. In Northern Quebec, there are over 50 varieties of land and marine game. In Grise Fjord, the Inuit find only 3 or 4, and most of it comes from the frozen Arctic Sea.
Compared to the hunting back in Nutaaq, it used to be very cold and very dark, and we have been used to hunting in open waters. Now we were in a land that had no open water. We lived off the seal breathing holes, and when we went to the water edge, it was very dark. We sometimes would wait for hours by a fox turd, thinking it was a seal's breathing hole because it was so dark. After waiting some time for the seal to come up, we would touch the hole and discover that we had touched a fox turd.
If there had been no seals, we would have frozen to death. Thanks to the seals, we were able to eat. We used the seal blubber to make oil for our oil lamps. We would melt the snow with our lamps, wash our clothes. There was no source of fresh water there. When it was very dark, our mothers would fetch ice, and they didn't even have bare essentials like a flashlight. They had brought lamps from Nutaaq, and they would use them to shine on the shore where they looked for ice.
RCMP report, Craig Harbour, 1953. All natives, with the exception of one, state being happy and content. Fatty, E9713, complains of not being able to see a long way in all directions from his tent.
Paddy was our leader. He was our father. The people that took us there misled us about what we should have found. So he used to say, they promised, and one could tell by his body language that he was not very happy.
Paddy tells the RCMP that he wants to return to Port Harrison. In the end, he agrees to wait and see what the summer will bring.
He would always sigh too and say, they promised we were going back. They promised that we were going to have a steady diet of caribou. His spirit started to slow down when he realized that it was not going to be as they had promised. His spirits fell fast, and he didn't make it throughout the first year.
RCMP report, Craig Harbour, 1954. One death occurred, Fatty, E9713, due to heart attack.
At this time of the year, it's dark all day long at Resolute. The moon provides the only light for the Christmas mail run. Resolute Bay, 700 miles closer to Russia than to Toronto. The temperature during this historic trip of the television film crew, 45 below. In an Air Force snowmobile, the CO takes the camera crew to an Eskimo village and discusses Arctic travel with John Rook of News Magazine.
How far away is this Eskimo camp, Ron?
The camp, John, there's a direct road joining our station to the Eskimo village, and by road it's approximately 5 miles.
On a tour of the Arctic islands, government official Gordon Steed raises concerns about the proximity of the military base.
The reasons for moving these families here is grounded in an attempt to keep them in their native state. Moving them to an area where they come into intimate contact with white men destroys the basis for this reasoning, leaving them untrained to cope with the problems presented by this contact.
At Resolute itself, permission is granted by the constable of the RCMP to bring the Eskimos to the Air Force camp so they could be filmed for television on the sound camera.
In an effort to preserve their traditional life, the RCMP officer at Resolute has been instructed to limit contact between the Inuit and the base.
The natives do not frequent the settled area of the island, only to trade at the Eskimo store. The patrol is made either by foot or snowmobile to the native camp every other day. During this time, all tents and persons are checked. Women and children have not left the camp since their arrival.
I remember vividly that we were forbidden to go there. To me, that was very strange to be forbidden to go near the base. It was the first time that had happened to us, and I never forgot that we were not allowed to go near the white people. In Nutaaq, there used to be lots of white people, especially when the sea lift came, and I remember that we used to mingle with them, even though we didn't speak the same language.
They told us to sew when white people were coming. We would use candles as the only means of light, and sometimes I would sew all night because the police had told me to complete this. And I would not have dreamt of not finishing the products because I would not have known how the police would have reacted because he was fearful. He used to be very happy when he saw the finished products. He never paid us, although sometimes he would give us chewing gums as payment.
They made us live a life as though we were dogs on a long leash. When a dog touches a person's belongings, the dog is punished by being hit. It was as though we were treated like that, and when the police found out that we were scavenging for food in the garbage dump, he would search our whole house to find what we took from the dump.
When the City Hall came again in August in 1954, we got our X-ray. That's when I was told that I had advanced TB. So I really had no choice. So I went down to Manitoba. When I had to leave for the hospital, I was scared. I didn't want to leave my family, but I wanted to get well. Many of our families had to spend a great deal of time in the hospital. So a lot of us grew up without the care of our mothers. Most of us children were motherless one way or another from 53 to 60.
Over the years, the RCMP keep a record of Inuit health problems.
At the present time, there are 14 Eskimos from Resolute who are hospitalized. And of these, 12 are undergoing treatment for tuberculosis. 5 births were registered during the year. However, 3 of these were premature.
I got pregnant 6 times, and I lost all of the babies because of the hardships. When I delivered another stillborn baby, actually I delivered twins that were stillborn. The police heard about this, and he came to ask me, "Why can't your children live?" I kept a lot of things in my mind, and I want to answer him. But as usual, I kept these things in my mind. What I want to say was, it is because you place us here where there is no heat. I have been trying to make heat, and I miscarried these little human beings. But I didn't say anything.
In March 1955, Minister of Northern Affairs Jean Lesage announces a slight change in government policy. The preservation of the Inuit in his primitive state is not a real alternative, he observes. It would mean segregation, isolation, and denial of the most humane services. Lesage's statement doesn't stop a second relocation to Resolute Bay and Grise Fiord the same year.
It will be moving day this summer for 35 Eskimos in Canada's Arctic. This is a purely voluntary migration. Under this scheme, Eskimos are moved from poor hunting conditions to regions where game is more readily available. The program has been an unqualified success. Although they are free to return if they wish, the response so far has been to urge their friends and relatives to join them.
The RCMP officer at Resolute describes a different situation.
To date, the present natives have enjoyed the virgin country surrounding Resolute. They do, however, from time to time express their desire to return to their friends and relatives at Port Harrison.
After meeting with a group of Inuit who asked to return to Port Harrison, a government official makes his recommendation.
I would be inclined to suggest that if any family goes back, that family should pay all or part of the transportation costs.
The Inuit at Grise Fiord and Resolute Bay can't afford to pay their own way home. Without their knowledge, the money they earn trapping and doing odd jobs for the RCMP and the military is being credited to something called the Eskimo Loan Fund. Set up to assist new Inuit business ventures, Loan Fund money was borrowed by the government to pay for supplying the relocation. Now, Inuit money is being used to pay back the loan. What extra credit they have is used to buy goods at the government store.
Products from the store used to run out quickly. We went without panic, sometimes for lack of flour. Sugar and tea also would sometimes run out. We used to try to make tea from the plants here. There were no cigarettes either. I used to smoke then. Well, cigarettes were scarce then. Now that they are available, I don't smoke anymore. With nothing up there, not even flour, we used to go hungry and there were no airplanes to bring food to buy.
In 1958, 2 little boys fall through the ice near their home at Grise Fiord. Their bodies are never recovered.
RCMP report, 1958. After the sudden deaths, morale was at a very low ebb. These natives still have their superstitions, and several stated that they wish to move from this area.
The government is clear about why the High Arctic settlements must be maintained.
The Eskimos at Resolute Bay and Grise Fiord are an invaluable human resource in the northern economic development taking place. As already mentioned, the occupation of these northern islands by Canada's first Arctic citizens only enhances our claims to sovereignty of these regions.
The CDHO used to come every year to give us health examinations. I used to believe that the ship one day would bring us home. Then after some years, the CDHO stopped coming, and then I knew that I would never return home because there would no longer be any means of transportation.
By the 1960s, things at Grise Fjord begin to change. Houses and a school are built, and the RCMP post is located next to the Inuit settlement. The people of Grise Fjord build a strong community, and life slowly improves. At Resolute Bay, houses and a school are also built, and a few Inuit men get permanent jobs at the base. After the first RCMP officer leaves, life seems to relax, and contact with whites becomes a regular event. In the 1960s, the base bar opens, first to the men, and then to the women.
The base was for the white people. And in my mind, I think it was, if an Inuit could come to the base and be amongst the white people, he was becoming one of them. When I was 5, 6, 7, 8, I guess it started off all right. I guess I was happy for a while, and the people I was living with were happy at the same time too, but people started drinking. And I guess they got to drink more and more, and then they would say, there's another place where we used to live. They used to tell me that, but I couldn't really believe them, that there was another place on earth.
In a place like Resolute Bay, there is nothing to do. You could not go out. You could not go fishing or hunting for waterfowl because it is very cold, so one has to stay in the house all of the time. The only time a person can really enjoy the life there is when a person has an abundance of alcohol. Even if you people don't drink now, you could start to drink if you were moved up there. It's all right in a place like Nutaaq if one doesn't drink. But up there, it's best to drink. The only way to tolerate living up there is to drink alcohol.
I was born in Resolute and born and raised, and growing up in Resolute was not very easy for me. You had to be tough. You became tough person, tough kid. It wasn't easy. You lost your language, part of it. You were taken advantage of, and you were scared most of the time.
The kids grew up realizing that this was the way of life here. I mean, I went through hell, but some kids went through hell too. Sometimes from one house to another, we would be running away from fightings or drunks, and then we would go to another family, and there'd just be kids there and nobody else taking care of them. And one of the things I really remember is the stove was out. I didn't know how to operate a diesel heating stove. And I had my brother on my back and some kids around, and these kids were half naked. And they were freezing, eh? You could hear them moving their jaws. And there was no heat in the house, and this was in the middle of winter, in the dark. In school, we were taught the white way, the white culture. Being in school was stressed that the Inuit way was no longer the way. So these kids, us, wanted to be white, but our parents couldn't be white. It was, they had this something that we didn't know anything about that. They kept trying to preach us, but we didn't want to hear it. I guess in our mind was, we don't want to be like you. Look at you. You're drunks. When the people started drinking more and more, I guess the people at the base started to realize they could take advantage of this, that they could bring down the booze and womanize. It was never during the daytime. Like, it was like a hush-hush sort of.
some friends and ourselves were trying to be in somewhere that nobody will find us. And then when you have to go to sleep at night, you're with your friend, and then you would wake up intoxicated parents entering, and you want to sleep but you can't. It was depressing. I mean, not fun at all. My impression of the history of Resolute is burden, small, isolated. What was that word? Fake community. That was my impression of how Resolute is. Portrayed honestly, portrayed.
In the 1970s, the bar is finally shut down, and the people of Resolute gradually take back control of their lives. For many, this will mean going home. Even though Grise Fiord did not experience the same problems as Resolute Bay, many elders there also returned to Northern Quebec.
It's very difficult for a lot of us when we got left behind, when my brothers and sisters moved back to Nutaaq, Elijah and Samuel and my sister Anna. It was just myself and another elderly woman left behind from the Nutaaq group. It was, at the first year, it was very difficult for me, but because the other people who live here, other families groups have always been very kind to us and supportive of us. I have coped and have learned to live without my relatives. So I concentrate on raising my family and children.
1,400 miles away, the elders return to their old community, which is now a large northern town called Nutaaq.
It was a happy event when we returned, because it was the way it used to be, for the stones to be warm and the plants to grow. So I was excited when we were about to arrive. But part of our lives, the people who were supposed to be here with us, the ones we have left in Nutaaq, had passed away. It could not be helped.
Among the young people who returned to Nutaaq is Tommy Ikaluk.
The first time when I really woke up was when I went to Frobisher. There was this black guy that was working there. He made me realize by talking to me about life, the white society, the black society, the whole world. I mean, he started to put things in my head that's, hey, I can be something different other than being a drunk and a troublemaker, and realize that what happened in Resolute wasn't right. He made me realize that there was a better way of life. No matter how much abuse and how much violence and how many deaths and suicides you have seen, if you know yourself, you'll be okay. And I realized that day that I didn't have to be bad, that there was another way of life. Maybe what my parents used to say in Resolute Bay, that there was a better place to live, a better way of life, maybe they were telling me the truth. And that day I woke up that there was something else outside, that I should be confident in the Inuit culture. Good points.
When we returned to Nutaaq, I tried to rejoice with the other people, but I had left my mother and sisters behind, because it was my application to accompany my husband. I try to live like this. When I see people that are happy, I try to be the same, although my heart hurts. I have to try and join the people who are rejoicing, but deep inside I am not happy. That is the way I am today.